All right. So again, welcome Roberta and Soraya. It's great to have two regular participants in the reading group share some thoughts and kind of synthesize insights from some of the greatest hits, shall we call them. We've got Gorbalenia, we've got Dupre and Stefan Gudinger and others who've participated in the reading group, very prominently cited in the paper. And I think it's an opportunity to revisit some of the key insights that we've been thinking about and talking through in the group about, viruses as living processes, getting past rhetoric about warfare with enemy agents. And we've got it paired with a paper that Roberta has written about microbial antagonisms, exploring space-time, utopia, heterotopia, atopia. And, maybe I'll just open it up and invite you two to kind of, bring us up to speed with your thinking. And, I think most of the folks in this room are familiar with many of the sources that you cite. So we can probably get to some of the more advanced ideas pretty quick.
Yeah, I think Roberta wanted me to get started, even if I will very soon pass it on to Roberta. But just as you say, Evan, this piece, I mean, really, many of the readings come out of this multi-species reading group. So I think without it, we wouldn't have been able to write it. And so it's nice to bring it back here. Maybe I should briefly say how we came to write this piece. I was invited to contribute to this topical collection on COVID-19, one of many, edited by Lisa Onaga and Giuseppe Bognolo in HPLS. This is the History and Philosophy of the Life Sciences. And so I had written a few short blog posts for the Laskin Institute for History and Policy here at UCLA on the problem of seeing the virus as just biology or something, and the problems connected with it. And so for me, this was somehow an opportunity to dig a little deeper, history and philosophy. So I think you can dig a little deeper into this question about, about the relationship of the biological and the social, and how this played out in and really the importance of how to understand this and in the way it plays out in the pandemic. And I think, I would say that this has been a problem with which much of my work has been concerned. Beginning with, it was my PhD in philosophy when I struggled with Merleau-Ponty's philosophy of the body and of embodiment and the distinction between the biological and the living body. So it's a long-standing interest I have to understand how the biological and the social, how we should think about it. And why are we learning about the virus only in biology books? That doesn't make sense to me. So just around this time, Roberta, whom I had known because she had spent the year here at UCLA as a visitor, and she shared the link for her new book. It's the Anthropology of Microbes. This came out in Italian, Anthropologia dei microbi, but it will be, I think a translation is planned, as far as I understand, in English translation. And so I thought it would be fun to write this piece with Roberta, and that's what we ended up doing. And it was actually also Roberta who then said I should definitely participate in this multi-species group. And you had told me about this before, Evan, but somehow it needed, that plan of the paper to make me really do it. And so that's the story. And Roberta will say how this fits with her other piece that she writes, or her work more generally.
So thanks, Soraya. I think it was important. So sorry. Here in Italy is night, and my dog is here snoring. But sorry, it's not me making strange noises. But we are a multi-species group, so I think you can bear with it, right? So I was saying, thanks, Soraya. Yes. I think it was important to start with a little bit of a narrative of why we arrived to write this paper together, and really came out of Soraya disappointment with this different explanation of the virus in biological terms versus the virus in approach as a social entity. And so we started to think through together, and while we were thinking together, also we attended this group, and this enriched and nourished our thinking. And so all in all, the piece is not, it doesn't make any new argument. It's just basically reviewing some of the literature that is already out there. And we just tried to put this different literature into dialogue with reference to the pandemic situation. So what we acknowledge is that there is a broad understanding of viruses as something linked to disease, as Gorbalenya also highlighted in his talk here for the group. Then I also met him and I had some more conversation with him. So, this idea of the virus link just to the disease is what fueled this understanding of the pandemic based on a mechanical model of contact and contamination. But against this, in the social science literature, there is all a series of concepts that give a different and more comprehensive picture of what a virus can be or is. So there is this more processual understanding of contagion and of the life of viruses. The life of viruses that are at the border between the living and non-living, that are systems, are clouds. So all these bring social scientists to claim that proliferation, contagion is a social matter, is not just a biological matter. But not only that is a social matter, but exactly because it's a social matter, is not just the same everywhere. Contagion cannot be just the same everywhere, but there are different degrees of exposure and vulnerability. And therefore, we cannot just rely on a mechanical model of contact and contamination. So this also suggests that exactly because of this contextualization, there is much need for social science intervention into public health and to the understanding and organization of the pandemic. And there, because as we say at the end of the paper, we mentioned this concept of Karen Barad, that is not just that we have to add the social to the biological, but that those are entangled together in this process of interaction. And therefore, we think that the multi-species approach to the study of pandemic is an important one because it can exactly capture these entanglements and also displace a fixity with an anthropocentric point of view. But we conclude somehow proposing an anthropology of viruses because anyway, even if we draw from a multi-species perspective and our approach is embedded within a multi-species approach, we acknowledge that the pandemic is a problem, especially for humans. As Gorbalenya told us, the pandemic is fine for viruses. So if we really stick to a multi-species approach, we do not even would need to find solutions to the pandemic, let's say. So it's important, starting from a multi-species perspective, to understand how the social coordination of humans can bring to a better understanding and management of the pandemic. So this was more or less our idea. And the second paper that we decided to present has nothing to do with the pandemic. Actually, it has been written before in the glorious non-pandemic era. And but in this paper, I particularly stress how space-times, in particular place, that is in the Alps, are created together in the joint action of humans and non-humans, microbes, cows, grass, so it's really important to appreciate this entanglement. I don't want to speak much about my paper now because I think it's nice here we focus on the work Soraya and I have written, but I'm really happy to expand more about my paper and to answer any question you might have.
Maybe jumping in a little deep. Last night, as I was reading your paper, I was going through some of the new things that I encountered in the bibliography, and one was a paper that Sasha Gorbalenya, well, actually a lecture that Sasha Gorbalenya wrote. So here you cite it, like Gorbalenya, who rejects the notion that viruses attack us. You're sort of pointing to points of correspondence between David Napier's work and this. Gorbalenya kind of goes into these ideas in great length in a popular lecture that he gave in 2011 called "Could We Live in Peace with Viruses?" And I think maybe this is something we should queue up for the reading group in the near future. But he asks in an open-ended speculative register. He says, we know that many viruses classified as pathogenic circulating in the human population cause fatal or serious complications in a minority of infections. And this is a point that he keeps making about SARS-CoV-2 and relentlessly insisting that we distinguish not the species of SARS-CoV-2, because it's not a species, it's a strain, but that we distinguish SARS-CoV-2, the biological entity, from the disease COVID-19. And then he goes on to ask, given this fact, given that most of these viruses don't cause serious diseases, basically what are they doing? It is true that even some small percentages could translate into large number of victims when the number of infections involves many millions. And this is why we mobilize our resources to bring down these small percentages. Yet we could not escape the question what these infections cause, particularly in the long term, to others, to the majority who were infected but did not suffer noticeably. And I just thought that was a kind of remarkable observation, even with this virus that is so pervasive in terms of disrupting the human social order and the functioning of the modern world system. The fact of the matter is that the majority aren't experiencing no-treated symptoms. So what is the virus doing to them? I just found that to be a provocative question, and just wanted to thank you for reading a little deeper and wider into Gorbalenya's archive.
Soraya, do you want to comment on, or? Oh, Soraya, you are muted.
Yeah, you see, we have these two papers by him, right? 2011, so much before the pandemic, and then this more recent one. So he has been saying these things for a long time. So before pandemic, I think that's interesting, right? Yeah, but in relation to the pandemic, how can we explain that some people, and most people maybe, right, don't experience any symptoms and some experience very bad symptoms? That's really the crux of the problem, right? If we understand that, we don't need to close down everything. Yeah, Roberta.
I discussed about this paper with Corbalenia, and he was so pleased that some people were interested in this perspective, because actually in the medical realm, he experienced some strong reactions to that piece. He received phone calls from colleagues, accusing him to give a too rosy picture of what is an encounter with the virus, because those colleagues maybe were seeing people dying every day because of viruses. And yet he was firmly convinced that, as you said, Eben, viruses have a bigger role than just, unfortunately, making some people sick or dying. On a broader evolutionary scale, there are other effects that are also exploited by biotechnologies. And yet, Soraya and I discussed a little bit this issue some days ago, in the sense that, okay, there is this evolutionary understanding of viruses, but we are thinking about SARS-CoV-2 that is also killing a lot of people. So what is the meaning of comparing the two, or putting into dialogue these two different understandings? And we still believe that it's important to keep in mind this broader understanding of the evolutionary role of viruses in order to better make sense of this pandemic now. So we do not think that are two separate things. With this, of course, we do not want to underestimate the sufferance and that this virus is creating, not just on bodies, but also on economies, on minds and everything, the social disruption. But yet, exactly because of that, it's important to understand its complexity.
Maybe just picking up on a line from your paper, you say viruses, it seems, are only noticed when something goes wrong. In the context of Anna Singh's arts of noticing, how might we notice viruses otherwise?
That is a great question. We probably notice because life is made also thanks to viruses, but we just don't call life virus. So we give positive connotations to life without acknowledging the role of viruses in that, I think.
Sevgi, you got your hand up.
Yeah. I have somehow relevant questions to that discussion. Roberta, when I was reading your piece on fermentation, I'm quite interested in traditional fermentation practices, so it was really amazing. But when I was reading it, I was wondering, do you know any study that considers roles of viruses in fermentation?
Yes, so as I said before, this research has been done before the COVID pandemic, and I was more interested in the microbiome and the role of microbes. Of course, viruses are part of the microbiome. Yes. Viruses are microbes, but they are a special class of microbes. So back then I miss it, Eben. I missed the arts of noticing the specificity of viruses versus other kinds of microbes. So in my field work, I didn't especially ask or notice things related to viruses versus microbes. But yeah, I think
but I'm asking biological studies, genetic studies that focus on viruses role in fermentation, not the ethnographic works.
Yeah, I'm sure there are many, but at the moment I cannot indicate. I mean, I know that there is the study of microbiome, But also within this bigger umbrella, there is the study of the virome. So especially focusing on the gene of the viruses composing ecological community. And there are many studies, and I can also put you in contact with some scientists, especially studying virus and the virome. I do not know at the moment biological studies that link fermentation to viruses, but if you want, you can write me and we can disentangle together the issue. It would be fun.
Yeah. Thank you.
Astrid, do you want to chime in about the ocean virome?
I don't know much more than I said in the chat. I was just trying to answer the questions on how do you notice viruses, and in the ocean there are just so damn many. It's the biomass that they contribute, in addition to being noticeable to killing bacteria and being noticeable to contributing to the carbon cycle. But just the sheer biomass, there are many of them. I don't know how this relates to COVID, so it was just a remark on the side.
Yeah, I think some of the arts of noticing just in a technical register, I mean, have to do with primers and just sequencing protocols. So in the same way that many eukaryotic fungi slipped through earlier attempts to sequence the genome of the ocean, like Stefan has written about some of the folks like Craig Venter who wanted to kind of sequence everything. And depending on the protocol that were used, viruses were or weren't noticed. And I would imagine the same would apply to, the sequencing protocol or practices of noticing for, biohazards at dairy farms. Francisco, do you want to jump in?
Oh, amazingly.
Yes, Evan. When I was reading the paper in HPLS, I was remembering about stuff that Margaret Glock has written about local biologies, and also some of the things that Maurizio Melloni has been writing about. So I just wanted to ask you if discourse related to medical anthropology could be useful to follow on what you have written for that journal.
In which sense do you, specifically to which debate? Because here you have written processual versus memetic epidemiological. Maybe if you want to say 2 more words.
Yeah, sure. Well, I am just putting there a preliminary contrast between the processual views that you are describing in the paper versus the other more common or traditional standpoints on how viruses and humans interact. So thinking about issues that are now being called a new wave of environmental determinism, and there are other ways in which authors have been referring to this, also involving epigenetics, actually. I was just wondering if those ideas, those concepts that these authors are entertaining could be somehow included in the argument that you have developed in the paper.
Mm-hmm. Soraya, do you want to say something or?
No, I remember that we had this actually as a reader comment that asked us also a similar question about the medical anthropologist, and we discussed it, Roberta, but do you remember what we decided?
I don't remember, sorry. Remind me, please, if you can.
Yeah, no, I can't remember what we decided. We thought we had somehow responded to this.
No, maybe the reviewer asked us to better point to which were the public health impact of our argument. This, I think. Anyway, I think that our argument is fully within these discourses in medical anthropology about epigenetics, about local biologies, and so on. And recently, Margaret Lock has also written a kind of updated version of her Local Biologist together with another colleague. I do not
situated biology.
Exactly. Instead of local, she speaks of, they speaks of situated, and I find it a nice update to the concept. And but as you rightly point, medical anthropology is not just one field. There are many different approaches, and there are people more concerned with public health that somehow I think some of them adhere to this more mechanical model of content and contamination, you know, advocating for the important role of standardized public health measures, while there are others that have probably a more nuanced understanding of what public health should be, and call for a more situated understanding of how this content and contamination happens in specific places. And I think these are the majority. So I think that the argument we make, that I repeat, is not our argument, it's just putting into dialogue different literature that are just running there out there, is an entry point for this this understanding of public health, that should not just be something extremely standardized, but more situated. And I think, as I said before, that's why it's important that also social scientists are part of that and part of the planning of public health. And in the paper, I just cite for in one phrase or two, I don't remember, the fact that there are new studies that, thanks to artificial intelligence and big data, they are trying to develop scenarios of very situated entanglement between the virus and humans in specific places. And they're just at the beginning. So I think it's important as social scientists that we look how these experiments are carried on, you know, without abstracting too much for the sake of harmonization of data. It's important that anyway, even if abstraction is made, it still keeps a trace of the situatedness. Otherwise, they are two abstract scenarios and what they can say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nina, you shared a paper in the chat, bacteriophages in the dairy environment from enemies and allies. I think this circles back to some of the things we were talking about with Astrid's paper about bacteriophages in the ocean. Do you want to say anything about the paper?
Yeah, I think what just came to mind asking how else we can notice viruses is the important role that bacteriophages play in our own immune system. And then I'm just happened to be wearing my Dairy Club shirt. So most of what we do in Dairy Club is prevent mastitis. So I don't know of any specific research about bacteriophages preventing mastitis. This paper might have some. I don't imagine there's a lot because it's pretty new in human immunology, and dairy immunology tends to lag behind human, but the summary for, I'm sure this group has discussed it before, but one hypothesis about even why humans have mucus, one of the reasons we have mucus is to provide a habitat for bacteriophages, which are viruses that eat bacteria and like to live in our mucus. Like it's a matrix that's just the perfect habitat for bacteriophages. And our mucus is packed with bacteriophages, which are a huge part of our immune system. Because, you know, enemy of an enemy is your friend. So that's just another way. I liked also your example in the paper about how many genes of ours come from horizontal transfer that's probably mediated by viruses. So both of those are ways that I like to notice viruses.
Yeah, and in fact, to go back to the paper, and Soraya, I don't know if you want to jump in, but you know, phage is one of the ways. You know, it comes from the word to eat, as you said, but it's also a way that the synthetic biologists use to get new biobricks or other gene sequences into synthetic microbes. But do you want to comment on that, Soraya or Roberta?
No, my comment was just that, you know, we haven't, I mean, and that's, I think that's exactly Gorbalenya's argument, right? That we haven't even started to look because we are so fixed on studying viruses always when something goes wrong, right? So in plant, actually not just in humans, also in plants, right? So that these are wonderful examples, right? That when we look, we find them, right? We just haven't started looking. So we find them apparently in the ocean, and we find them in mucus, and you know, and maybe many other part of the microbiome. So that's already a lot of examples that maybe the new genomic technologies get us there with these, you know, with these methods, which initially don't seem very promising, I thought, right? I remember when Craig Venter was sort of starting, you know, write the first things about starting to, you know, sequence the ocean, or he spoke, I think, in these terms. It didn't seem very promising, you know. This was at the beginning of genomics, but I mean, maybe one gets, and you know, and with the analysis becoming better, maybe one does find unexpected things, like for instance, that viruses do play a role in certain, you know, one that we haven't noticed because it hasn't produced problems, possibly.
Yeah,
Roberta,
speaking with Gorbalenya, I could really feel his frustration, you know, of he said he asked for many years funding to create a taxonomy of viruses that could give a broader picture of also the evolutionary positive role viruses has. But funding were always very rare for that kind of research. And he said that if those studies would have been carried out before the pandemic, the current pandemic, we would have many more possibilities to understand this pandemic. So, yeah.
Anne, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Roberta and Soraya, for these fascinating papers, which the one you wrote together, which takes up this process philosophy that we also read in Ian Babur, where he talks about whitehead. So as I understand it, I guess this is more a comment than a question, but viruses are world making for all living things. And the way in which you approach it with history, philosophy, and anthropology can bring this world making to the fore and can ask important questions that in the natural sciences they might miss. For instance, if it is virologists or bacteriologists, they don't ask questions what it does mean to be in the world, about relationality with the virus, what is normal and what is pathological. And I guess in your paper on cheese, in the conclusion, you ask which space times will we be willing to support in the Alps, utopias, heterotopias, or atopias? And it seems all of them, in order for us to recalibrate how we relate to viruses and bacteria. And it made me think of a quotation by Tobias Hayes, who's also an anthropologist and who wrote about the coronavirus. And he says, quote, "To speak of the human as the modernists did is like taking a piece of the wild, putting it into a petri dish, adding bleach and antibiotics until more than half of what's in there is dead, and then celebrating the barely living remains as the human," end quote. And as you just said, that social sciences can be an intervention into public health, that this is something that is very important, and also speaks to a reading by Jerry Lorimer that that talked about this post-Pasteurian responses to modern anxieties about microbial dysbiosis. So yeah, as I understand, maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, but it seems to me that all three should be addressed: the utopias, heterotopias, and atopias.
Thanks for this really nice reading, and I prefer to keep the question open in the conclusion, but yeah, I think this is a very good path to follow, you know, that all the three should be there, but especially they should be in dialogue. I I involved the Ethiopia scientist in the revision of the paper, and was not easy. I had to cut many things and negotiate a lot of things. But I think really the value of that paper is also in the process and in the negotiating with the scientists, in seeing that there are other views. And at the same time, maybe for other colleagues of mine to see that there is also the Ethiopia position that also has its own legitimacy, you know, and that the value is in the dialogue and in finding negotiation together. So that's why also I thought there are many concepts in the paper brought up by cheesemakers, but I think microbial antagonists give the sense of what I wanted to say. And I thank here Rachel, because she, in one of her readings, she suggests me to bring this microbial antagonist concept forward, exactly because it's the idea of the cohabitation of different perspectives, but that at the same time they can live together even if they are different, or thanks because they are different, but have found ways to stay together despite or thanks to their difference. So thanks very much for this comment.
So Stefan, you had a bunch of things in the chat. I've also got some questions about microbial antagonism, but do you want to share any of those thoughts in the chat and some of the linking papers?
They're mostly thoughts rather than narratives. I mean, the ocean carries memories of SARS-CoV-2 is an interesting diagnosis of our moment, maybe more than it is a kind of groundbreaking marine biological observation, right? Because there's lots of viruses in the sea. So of course there's SARS-CoV-2 connectivities, but it's just an interesting thing for this group of people to sort of surface that as a warrant for kind of viral oceanography, right? So I don't have much more to say than that this is an interesting cultural moment for the surfacing of SARS-CoV-2 in all kinds of places that you wouldn't expect it. But yes, there is a whole ocean virology conversation which has been ongoing. This is just a kind of a way that finds an opportunity to surface. It's not much more than that.
If I may add something about what Stefan just said, when at the beginning of the outbreak, I spoke with some scientists, the scientists I was working with for the microbiome project. And the leader, he said that what he was especially intrigued were the water of the savage. Rachel, dico giusto? Le fogne, savage?
Sewage.
Sewage. Yeah, thanks. Because, you know, somehow water as a medium, it goes back a little bit to this cloud idea of virus. So it distinguished from this contact and mechanical model of contact and contamination, but it's more a fluid medium that gives this idea of a system of cloudiness, and maybe is more easy to study than air. So yeah, virus and water have some affinity probably.
Although the sewage stuff is usually about a very particular sewage site that represents a very particular community. And, you know, the ocean is this completely different sort of scale for thinking. So I think you're right that water does something similarly in each case, but in one case, namely the big scale ocean, it's this giant metaphor machine, I feel like.
No, yeah, of course there are. Even if maybe in the sewage there is such a concentration of of viruses and bacteria that maybe strange things can happen.
So lots of interesting comments in the chat. Flavio, clouds are made of water. Do you want to riff on that?
Oh, thanks. No, the fact is that I'm almost sleeping because I speak from Berlin. And here it's well, 11:15, and today has been a very beautiful day, and there was a snowstorm, which is very nice. And yeah, I'm thinking to the fact that yeah, water, it seems to be sort of quite important vector. And somehow I was reflecting to another point, which is this thing that was said by Roberta about the standardization of methodologies or of different kinds of ways to take care of people sick, which is the usual way for institutions to take care of, for instance, pandemics or epidemics. And then I saw this in sort of dialogue with situated biology, and the problem of putting together for institutions like, I don't know, the WHO or national health institutions, how to put in practice these situated biologies, and the fact that well, basically the first attempts to take care of epidemics at the international level were made by let's say diplomats and institutions that try to address the problem that epidemics brought to international trade, for instance. So there are different levels, and then I'm wondering that how to consider also the institutional level of for instance, the research is made by biologists on phages, which back in time were quite promising, and many bacteria have been tracked through viruses. And nowadays it seems that viruses are mostly bad guys, and of course they are now more than before. But not only bad guys, because they have very many roles, but it seems that once again the war metaphor is here among us, and then just wondering if this dialogue between institutions and small communities like your community could be articulated in a I don't know, in which ways or whatever.
I think that's the challenge for the next years, and to situate that complexity. And I think we have the great opportunity to work together also with other scientists in the hard sciences, working, as I said before, with big data and artificial intelligence, that are some technologies that also approach complexity from a different epistemological and probably political point of view. But again, going back to the microbial antagonism attitude, I think we can create productive collaborations to think through difference.
Stefan, one of the other references you posted in the chat is about fermentation fighting viruses, some rice ferments that seem to have anti-influenza virus activity. And to me, this seems like a classic example of, you know, both you and Heather's thoughts at work, you know, both in terms of the microbiopolitical situated calculations and symbiopolitical possibilities. And maybe it's an invitation for you and Roberta to dialogue a little bit. So Roberta, like how do you see your ideas about microbial antagonism, sort of vis-a-vis now, you know, the classic theories of microbiopolitics?
Yeah, as I said before, that should be, I think what microbiome, microbial antagonism is introducing is these strong ideas that we can stay with the pathogen, but we just have to find ways of coexistence that do not pre-identify me or the other as a pathogen. And yeah, so I think this is how it relates to more broader literature of microbial politics. But I don't know if I really captured your question, if I answered your question.
Maybe. Do you want to jump in, Stefan?
Well, I mean, the microbiopolitics would be the microbiopolitics of enmity or a microbiopolitics of care, or all of those kinds of things are, as we've been saying over and over again, very, very situated, right? And so the coming in and out of focus of these different relations depends on the relations. And I think just going back to what Heather was trying to point to with the notion of the post-Pasteurian was that the post-Pasteurian was not anti-Pasteurian, right? It was post in the sense of, you know, after, or after in the sense that Marilyn Strathern once wrote about after nature, you know, simultaneously in the wake of, sometimes against, but mostly chronologically after, you know, particular set of lessons and attitudes had been absorbed. And so that the post-Pasteurian is not to abandon the Pasteurian, but to recognize that the Pasteurian becomes just one piece of a particular microbiopolitic. Right, so I mean, there's plenty of post-Pasteurians who are all about microbial antagonism for some microbes at some times.
Yeah, and I think this is important to acknowledge, especially in the pandemic times where there is a difference between post-Pasteurians and negationists.
Mm. Right.
And yeah, and what Stefan just said, I think is the point, the subtle but very, very important point that distinguishes these two groups of people. And the hetero as well said something along those lines in one lecture of about 1 or 2 months ago. She was thinking through post-Pasteurian cultures. She was thinking through the pandemic, starting from her work. And she made this difference, you know, that I think is important to not just conflate different approaches into one and to.
Yeah, we really need to have Heather on here. We should have had her on here 8 months ago. She's been a great occasional Zoom bomber, but yeah, we need to queue up classic microbiopolitical thinking and some of her latest thoughts. Francisco, go ahead, Soraya.
No, I just wonder this post-Pasteurian or other kinds of approaches. I mean, it's also something maybe in reflecting on, you know, what we talked last time about the origins of these things, right? And so in the preventive mode, because now in the middle of it, I don't know if it's easy to switch, right? But it may be in thinking about how this came about and how we can maybe prevent that it comes about again, that these kinds of thinking may be important. I don't know if people agree with that.
Astrid, you have your hand up.
I have a completely unrelated question. So if somebody wants to respond to Soraya immediately, I can hold off. I just wanted to ask Roberta about her other paper and about the temporality in the space-times of these three spaces. So as someone who's also very interested in microbes and temporality, I wonder, how do you think about the temporality in the topia-cell spaces, right? How do you think about the connection of space and time in your paper?
Sorry, but you asked me specifically in atopia or in all dimensions?
You specify the topias, the heterotopia, atopia, they're all topias, right? They are
okay,
kinds
okay.
of spaces, and how do they differently relate to temporalities, these three different spaces?
So thanks for this question. It's something that me and Heather thought together, because she is also contributed to that special issue, but she speaks about time spaces, I think. So just a reversal. So we were thinking what differentiates our approaches to space or time. And because I did my field work in a specific place, that is the Alps, the high mountains. And there is a lot of care for the place. So a lot in the narrations, there is a lot of emphasis on the territory, on the place, on caring for that specific place, or taking care of it or not taking care of it. So for me, I was thinking of space times, but why times as well, and not just space? Because as I articulate in the three different sections, the way in which those people were taking care for the place was also creating different temporalities. You know, like in Utopia, there was this time that was somehow fixed and still, and in Heterotopia was a more dynamic temporality, more nested also into the contemporary. And in Utopia probably was the time of speed and technology and future, but that without being anchored to a place, to a specific place, it's also probably missed that solidity. So, or open up a question mark of what is this future time, you know, when is disentangled from place. So for me, temporality was important as well, but was probably secondary in respect to place, because the ethnography that I had was so much focused on place. Instead, Heather's contribution that you can read soon when the special issue will appear, is more focused on the timing, how the timing then is linked to these fermentation practices and places as well, mobilities. Yeah.
Yeah, thank
But
you.
I
I'd
would
like
be
to
very
about the care too.
about
Sorry.
No, I just said that I would be more curious to hear more about your thinking of time in relation to space and to virus, to microbes and everything.
Well, I'm writing about different kinds of haunting, so different ontology connected to different temporalities. But yeah, I find it really interesting that you actually in your narrative right now connect the different ways, the different spaces via different modes of caring to different temporalities. That's something I'm also very interested in. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks.
And we're almost at the witching hour. Francisco, do you want to ask your question about homeless youth?
Well, yeah, in connection to the issue of situatedness, I also recalled about these news pieces that I have been reading recently about homeless people who, according to certain journalists, might be immune or are not so much affected by coronaviruses that are around us, because supposedly they are much more exposed than people who are locked down and so on. So I was just wondering if any of you have been reading similar information in local news outlets.
There have been some news about this in the Los Angeles area. We have very many homeless. They were trying to actually get them into rooms, but that was only successful up to a point. So the idea was to get them into rooms, right? Actually, hotel rooms. There was a program called Room Key, that because the hotels are all empty, so there is a project in getting homeless people into the hotels. But I mean, several thousands they managed to put into hotels, but many more were unhoused. And so initially they were surprised that there were so little virus, COVID cases among the homeless. They put it down to being at the fresh air, because, supposedly that helps. But recently there have been cases actually. And so I don't know, recently there have been more cases. About the young people, yeah, that's about the age and the effect of virus. That's a big thing. Sometimes it's put down. I haven't read actually enough where, especially children are not so much affected also, but they put it also down to the effectiveness of the immune system, which older people gets weaker, right? That's that's why the age plays such a role, supposedly, with elder people, and underlying conditions that accumulate. But I don't know anything about. It's just the strength of the immune system, the response of the immune system. But then sometimes the immune system response is too strong, right? So how that is balanced is also a question. Yeah, so I don't know more. It's very sort of just what I read in the newspapers.
Interesting, Soraya. Thank you.
So thanks, Roberta and Soraya. It's a really stimulating discussion today. So congrats, thanks. And next week we have Mark Honigsbaum, author of Pandemic Century, A History of Global Contagion from the Spanish Flu to COVID-19. Yeah, the details are in your email. See you soon. And Nina, thank you for all the amazing illustrations. And you've probably got an archive at this point. Maybe we could archive them all on the internet, either on Facebook, or we've got this web page. We've got a number of different places. So please send all the illustrations, and we'd love to put them out there.
Sure, we'll do.
Sorry, can you tell me, so are you doing an illustration of every sort of discussion you listen to?
Not everyone, but I've got a few.
Okay, wow, no, we would be very keen. I now see that there's actually our names written. Yeah,
yes,
so
that's you.
I didn't realize it was relating to this conversation, but yeah, we would love to see it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks you, Eben, thanks Rachel, thanks you all, because as we said already, we couldn't write that paper without the existence of this group. So thanks a lot.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.